I spent 3 years saving $40,000 for my son. Then he told me I wasn't as good as his stepmom. My name is Claire Bennett, and I'm 58 years old. If you asked my son who had given him the better life, he probably wouldn't say my name. For years, I convinced myself that if you asked who loved him more, he still would. I wasn't always so sure. Daniel and I divorced when Ethan was 7. There was no affair or explosive betrayal, only years of growing apart until we finally admitted neither of us was happy anymore. Because Daniel's work schedule offered more stability, while mine as an electrician demanded long, unpredictable hours, he became Ethan's primary parent. I agreed to every other weekend and alternating holidays because I believed protecting Ethan's routine mattered more than fighting over custody. Living apart from my son was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but I made myself one promise. If I couldn't be there every day, I'd make every moment we shared count. For the next 11 years, I never missed a child support payment. $1,400 left my account every month, even when work was slow, and it swallowed nearly a third of my income. I drove an aging pickup with no air conditioning, rented a tiny one-bedroom apartment, and lived far more simply than I wanted because every dollar I saved meant Ethan never had to go without. Whenever he visited, his favorite cereal was in the cupboard, clean sheets were waiting on the pull-out bed, and there was always room for him, even if there wasn't much room for anything else. Money disappeared faster than I could earn it. Between baseball fees, school supplies, birthday gifts, new sneakers, and countless little expenses that technically weren't mine anymore, there was always something Ethan needed. I never kept score. If I could help, I did, because that's what mothers do. When Ethan turned 10, Daniel married Vanessa Carter, a successful financial advisor whose income far exceeded anything either of us earned. I genuinely wanted Ethan to enjoy the opportunities she could provide, or at least I kept telling myself that. The comparisons began almost immediately. Vanessa bought me a PlayStation. I'd spent months saving for the mountain bike waiting in my garage, but after thanking me, Ethan asked if we could stop by Vanessa's house so he could pick up the PlayStation too. Not long afterward, he came bouncing into my apartment wearing a Hawaiian shirt. Guess where we're going for spring break? Where? Hawaii! His excitement made me smile. That's amazing. Then he asked, what are we doing next month? I showed him a brochure for a nearby state park. I thought we could go camping. They just reopened the lake. His smile faded. Oh, it wasn't anger or disappointment. It was comparison. Even at 10, Ethan already knew which vacation sounded more exciting. Children don't understand mortgages over time or why one parent buys plane tickets while the other packs sandwiches into a cooler. I never blamed him, but as the years passed, the comparisons kept growing. Vanessa's SUV was newer, her house was bigger, her Christmas presents came in larger boxes. Eventually, I stopped trying to compete. Instead, I focused on the things money couldn't buy. I spent long Saturdays teaching Ethan how to throw a curveball, helped him through hours of math homework at my tiny kitchen table, and took him camping every summer. He complained about sleeping bags instead of hotel rooms and campfires instead of resort pools, but every night we'd roast marshmallows, stare at the stars, and invent ridiculous stories about the constellations. Those weekends became my favorite memories, and I hoped someday they'd become his too. The years passed quickly. Ethan graduated from college with a marketing degree, and over 4 years I quietly contributed more than $23,000 toward his tuition, using money I'd once hoped would become the down payment on my own house. I never told him, children shouldn't carry the weight of their parents' sacrifices. He found a good job, built a career, and about 3 years ago introduced me to Emily. She was kind, warm, and genuinely excited about the future they were building together. When they announced their engagement, I couldn't have been happier for them. Their wedding took place 6 months ago, and it was beautiful. Vanessa paid for nearly everything, from the vineyard venue to the lavish honeymoon across Europe. During the reception, she gave a long, heartfelt toast praising Ethan's success before declaring how proud she was to have helped shape the man he'd become. The room erupted in applause. When it was my turn, I spoke for less than 2 minutes. I remembered the little boy who once insisted sleeping bags were better than hotel beds because they meant another adventure together, told him how proud I was of the man he'd become, and handed him a card with a $5,000 check inside. It was everything I could comfortably give. After opening Vanessa's gift, Ethan hugged her first and thanked her in front of everyone. When he finally reached me, all I got was a polite smile, a quick side hug, and a quiet, "Thanks, Mom," before another guest pulled him away. It hurt more than I wanted to admit, but I refused to let my feelings become part of his wedding day. Driving home alone, I repeated the same words I told myself for years. Love isn't a competition. Several months later, Ethan called unexpectedly. "Mom, Emily and I were wondering if you'd come over for dinner next weekend. We've got something important we want to talk to you about." His serious tone made me smile all evening. Maybe they were expecting a baby. Maybe they'd found a house. Maybe life was finally falling into place. What Ethan didn't know was that I'd been planning a surprise of my own. For nearly 3 years, I'd quietly worked overtime, skipped vacations, postponed replacing my old truck, and cut every unnecessary expense until my savings reached $40,000. The night before dinner, I sealed the cashier's check inside a white envelope, slipped it into my purse, and left home believing I was about to give my son the greatest gift I'd ever been able to afford. I had no idea I was walking into the conversation that would change our relationship forever. Emily greeted me with a warm hug, and for a while the evening felt completely ordinary. Their apartment was cozy, wedding photos decorated the walls, homemade pasta filled the air with the smell of garlic and basil, and Ethan poured drinks while we chatted about work, the weather, and everyday life. The envelope rested in my purse the entire time, and every few minutes I caught myself smiling, imagining how surprised he'd be when I handed him $40,000. I hoped that, just once, he'd see that even if I couldn't compete with luxury vacations or expensive gifts, I'd never stopped investing in his future. When Emily quietly set down her fork and exchanged a look with Ethan, I knew they had rehearsed whatever came next. "So," Ethan said, clearing his throat, "we wanted to talk to you about something important." I figured. I explained that buying a house had been harder than expected, and that Vanessa had been helping them with their finances, reviewing their credit, and even considering co-signing the mortgage. I nodded, genuinely happy they had someone experienced to guide them. Then his tone changed. "Mom, I don't want you getting hurt later when you see everything Vanessa does for us." I frowned. "I'm not following." Emily gently touched his arm before he continued. "We've been talking about expectations, and we think it's better to be honest. I've always believed honesty mattered." Hein took a slow breath. "You're just not as good as Vanessa." For a second, I thought I'd misunderstood him. "I'm sorry. I don't mean you're a bad person," he said quickly. "She's just been more generous," Emily added quietly. "She buys better gifts, and she helps us financially," Ethan finished. "She's simply able to do more than you." Neither of them sounded angry. They sounded calm, almost reasonable, as though they believed they were sparing my feelings. "We just don't want you feeling embarrassed comparing yourself to her," Emily said. Embarrassed. The word echoed in my head as I looked at my 29-year-old son. I saw the little boy who'd cried after scraping his knee at baseball practice, the teenager who used to call me whenever his car made a strange noise, and the young man I'd spent my entire life trying to protect. He wasn't trying to be cruel. He genuinely believed what he was saying, and that realization hurt more than if he'd shouted it. Memories rushed through me all at once. Driving home through unbearable summer heat because repairing my truck meant delaying his school clothes, living on instant noodles after paying his baseball fees, working double shifts before Christmas, and sending tuition payments while postponing my own retirement. None of those choices had ever felt like sacrifices because I'd always believed love was measured by showing up. Apparently, my son believed it was measured by receipts. Neither of them spoke. They waited for tears or an argument. Instead, I smiled. "You're right," I said calmly. "Vanessa earns more than I do. She can buy better gifts, afford bigger vacations, and give you financial help I never could." Relief immediately crossed Ethan's face. "Exactly. I understand perfectly." The tension around the table disappeared. Emily even smiled. "I knew you'd understand." I reached into my purse, placed the white envelope between us, and said, "I was planning to give this to you tonight." Ethan opened it, and the color drained from his face. $40,000. I've been saving for nearly 3 years. Emily stared at the check in disbelief. "This is enough for a down payment." It would have been. They kept looking at the check as if they couldn't believe it was real. I quietly reached across the table, took it back from Ethan's hands, folded it once, and tore it in half. Before either of them could react, I folded the pieces again and kept tearing until nothing larger than a postage stamp remained. The scraps drifted across the table like confetti. "Mom!" Ethan shouted. Emily stared at me. "What are you doing?" "I just did." Ethan's voice cracked. "Why?" I met his eyes. "Because tonight you showed me exactly where I stand." "That's not what I meant." I don't think I misunderstood. I only meant Vanessa could do more financially. "And I'm choosing to believe you." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "This isn't fair." I looked at her quietly. "No, it isn't. And I never promised you this money." She had no response. I stood, picked up my purse, and looked at Ethan one last time. "If Vanessa is the better parent, then ask her to help you buy your house." I walked to the front door without waiting for an answer. Behind me, Ethan called my name again and again, but this time I never looked back. I never looked back. By the time I reached my truck, my phone was already vibrating inside my purse, and I didn't need to check the screen to know who was calling. For the first time in 21 years, I let it ring. That night, I ignored every call from Ethan, Emily, Daniel, and even Vanessa. When I finally got home, there were already 9 missed calls waiting for me. I made myself a cup of tea, sat alone at the kitchen table, and stared at the empty chair across from me. It reminded me of the countless Saturday nights Ethan had spent there growing up, eating frozen pizza, watching old baseball games, and arguing with me over which team would win the World Series. Back then, he never cared how much money I earned. Simply being together had always been enough. Somewhere along the way, that had changed, and I couldn't decide whether it happened so gradually that I missed it, or whether I'd simply refused to see it. Daniel called the next morning. "What happened last night?" he asked. "Didn't Ethan tell you?" "He said there was a misunderstanding." I closed my eyes. Did he repeat exactly what he said to me? I hesitated. "Not exactly." "I thought so." "He said emotions got out of control." I let out a quiet laugh. No words got out. After another long pause, he finally asked what Ethan had actually said, so I repeated the conversation word for word. When I finished, Daniel was silent before quietly admitting, "I didn't know he'd put it like that." "He didn't put it any particular way," I replied. "He meant every word." "I'm sure he didn't. He told me I wasn't as good because I couldn't buy what someone else could." Daniel sighed. "I'll talk to him." "I think you should." That evening, Ethan appeared at my apartment looking exhausted, his eyes red and his clothes still wrinkled from the day before. "Can I come in?" For a moment, I considered refusing, but eventually stepped aside. He slowly walked through the apartment, taking in the worn sofa, the tiny dining table, and the faded curtains as though he were seeing them for the first time before quietly saying, "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For everything." "What exactly is everything?" I hesitated. "I shouldn't have upset you." I shook my head. "I wasn't upset, Ethan. I was hurt." He insisted he'd only been talking about money, that Vanessa simply had more to give financially. I let him finish before asking the question he'd avoided. If someone loves you more but spends less money, are they worth less? No. If someone sacrifices more but can't afford luxury vacations, are they a worse parent? No. Then why did your words say otherwise? He couldn't answer. I brought us each a glass of water before sitting back down. "Do you remember the summer your baseball team made the regional tournament? You needed new cleats, Mummy, and I couldn't afford them, so I worked every Saturday that month. I drove you to every practice, cheered at every game, and never once told you I was exhausted. Do you remember my old truck? The blue one? The one with the broken air conditioner?" He nodded. "I drove it through 3 summers because repairing it would have cost almost exactly what your baseball season did." His expression changed. "You remember graduating college?" "Of course. You thanked me for helping with tuition, but you never knew I took out a loan to cover part of it. I finished paying it off 4 years ago." He stared at me in disbelief. "You never told me." I wasn't looking for applause. Lowering his eyes, he whispered, "I thought you were doing okay." I was. Every sacrifice I made was my choice, and I've never regretted a single one. "Then why does this hurt so much?" I held his gaze. "Because after everything, you decided a parent's worth could be measured by what they bought instead of what they gave." His eyes filled with tears. "I never meant that. Maybe not consciously, but that's exactly what your words said." He covered his face and apologized again, this time with genuine remorse. For a brief moment, I wanted to cross the room, hug him, and tell him everything would be all right. Then I remembered the $40,000 check I'd torn apart because my own son had unknowingly put a price on my love, and I stayed where I was. After a long silence, he lowered his hands and quietly admitted, "We can't buy a house now." There it was. Even beneath the guilt, the money still found its way back into the conversation. "So ask Vanessa." He looked at me, confused. "What? She's better, isn't she?" He flinched. "Mom, isn't that what you told me?" "She won't give us $40,000. "Why not?" "She's already done a lot." "So she's done enough, but you're still willing to ask me." Han had no answer. After staring at the floor for several seconds, he slowly stood. "I guess I should go." "I think that's best." Han paused at the door. "I do love you." "I know," I replied quietly. "I'm just not sure you understand what that means yet." He nodded once before leaving, and the apartment felt even emptier after the door closed behind him. The following afternoon, Daniel called again, but this time his voice carried something closer to guilt than concern. "I found something out." "What is it?" He hesitated before saying, "Ethan and Emily have been joking about ranking everyone in the family based on who contributes the most to their lives." A chill ran through me. "Vanessa was first," he continued. "I was second. Emily's parents were third. I already knew what came next." "And me?" His answer was barely above a whisper. "Fourth. 29 years of bedtime stories, school plays, camping trips, homework, baseball games, and countless ordinary moments had somehow left me behind, people who had known my son for only a few years. They said it was supposed to be funny, Daniel added quickly. I let out a bitter laugh. No, it wasn't. I'm sorry, Claire. So am I. After we sat in silence for a moment, he finally asked, "What are you going to do?" My eyes drifted to an old photograph of 12-year-old Ethan grinning beside a campfire. "If they've decided I'm fourth," I said quietly, "then I'll contribute like fourth place." "And what's that?" "Nothing." When the call ended, I realized that for the first time since Ethan was born, I had stopped trying to earn my own son's approval. The next week crawled by. Every day followed the same routine. Work, another screen full of missed calls, a quiet dinner, and bed. Ethan texted constantly at first, asking to talk, insisting he'd been thinking, apologizing, then eventually accusing me of punishing him before ending with, "I guess I know where I stand now." I read every message. I answered none of them. The following Saturday, I drove to my favorite diner, a place where I'd eaten breakfast almost every weekend for 15 years. The waitresses already knew my order before I sat down, and the familiar routine usually brought me peace. That morning, the familiar comfort of the diner disappeared the moment I stepped inside. Sitting together in a booth were Ethan, Emily, Daniel, and Vanessa. They'd clearly arrived before me and planned this meeting. Emily spotted me first. "Claire!" Daniel immediately stood. "Please, just 5 minutes." Every instinct told me to turn around and leave, but then I noticed Linda, the waitress who'd served me breakfast for years, watching from behind the counter. She could tell something was wrong, and I didn't want to make a scene. I walked over, sat down without taking off my jacket or ordering coffee, and waited. Vanessa folded her hands. "I'm glad you came." I didn't. The silence stretched until Daniel finally spoke. "We're all here because we want the same thing." "And what's that?" "To fix this." I looked at Ethan. He couldn't even meet my eyes. Vanessa spoke carefully. "I know this has become much bigger than anyone expected." It became exactly as big as it needed to. Emily shifted uneasily. "We all said things we regret." I didn't. She blinked. "I mean, I know what you meant." Vanessa leaned forward. "Claire, I never wanted Ethan comparing us." "Really?" She nodded. "I've always respected everything you've done for him." "Then why didn't you stop it? You heard him thank you before me at his wedding. You watched him compare vacations, gifts, and everything else." She lowered her eyes. "I should have said something." The regret in her voice sounded genuine, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I believed her. Vanessa hadn't created the comparisons. She'd simply benefited from them. The responsibility belonged to Ethan. He finally looked up. "I'm sorry. I said nothing. I know I've apologized before, but I understand now." "Do you?" "I've been thinking about everything. The baseball games, the camping trips, college. I finally see how much you sacrificed." I held his gaze, waiting to hear what came next. I studied him for a moment before asking quietly, "Then why did you say it?" He shook his head. "I honestly don't know." Emily answered before he could. "We got used to measuring everything. Gifts, vacations, who paid for dinner. After a while, it just became normal. I don't think we even realized what we were doing anymore." I believed her, and somehow that made it worse. After a while, it stopped feeling like a habit. It became the way they saw the world. Daniel cleared his throat. "Claire, we're all trying to help Ethan and Emily buy a house. What if we all contributed? You wouldn't have to carry the whole burden." I already knew where this was headed. "We could split it," he continued, glancing at Vanessa. "Everyone gives what they can." Emily nodded eagerly. "It doesn't have to be all on you." I couldn't help smiling. "You're still asking me for money." No one denied it. Vanessa quietly offered to help. Daniel said he would too, and then both looked at me. "If we work together..." "I already did," I interrupted. "I spent 3 years working overtime, skipped vacations, postponed replacing my truck, and saved $40,000. I'd already done my part before my own son explained why I wasn't good enough." Ethan closed his eyes. "Mom, so now I'm contributing exactly what I feel comfortable contributing. And that's nothing?" Emily leaned forward. "We're talking about our future." "No," I replied. "We're talking about my money. Those are two different conversations." Daniel sighed. "This feels spiteful." I met his eyes. "No, it's called consequences." No one had an answer. Ethan's frustration finally boiled over and he slammed his hand onto the table hard enough to rattle every coffee cup. Several customers turned to stare. "What else do you want from me?" he asked, his voice breaking. I answered calmly. "When did you actually apologize?" "I've been calling you." "That's not an apology." "I came to your apartment and asked for money. I told you I loved you. You also told me you couldn't buy a house without my help." His shoulders slumped. "You apologized because your plan fell apart." "No," he whispered. "I apologized because I hurt you." "They're not the same thing." After a long silence, he looked up again. I don't expect the money anymore. I know it's gone, and I know I don't deserve it. I just don't want to lose my mom. Part of me wanted to believe him, but trust doesn't return because someone finally says the right words. It comes back only when those words are matched by consistent actions. Vanessa slowly stood. I think we've pushed enough for today. Before leaving, she looked at me and said, I'm sorry I never stopped the comparisons. I appreciate hearing that. She turned to Ethan. Your mother deserved better. I know, he said quietly. Emily reached for his hand, but neither of them looked at me. I picked up my purse and Linda, the waitress, hurried over with my untouched coffee in a paper cup. I figured you'd still want this. I smiled. Thank you. She squeezed my arm gently as I headed toward the door. Mom, Ethan called. I stopped but didn't turn around. I really do love you. I know, I replied. I've never doubted that. But love without respect eventually becomes lonely. Then I walked outside. This time, no one followed me. Almost 6 weeks passed after that breakfast. The calls stopped, the messages disappeared, and life slowly settled into a quieter routine. I buried myself in work, trying not to wonder whether Ethan missed me as much as I missed him. Then one Tuesday evening, my older sister called. You didn't know? She asked. Know what? Emily's pregnant. The words left me speechless. They never told you? I shook my head even though she couldn't see me. When did they find out? About 3 months ago. My chest tightened. They'd already known during the dinner. Linda hesitated before adding, Emily admitted they planned to tell you after the conversation about the house. I closed my eyes, realizing that even the happiest news of their lives had been planned around a conversation about money hurt more than I expected. 2 weeks later, an email appeared in my inbox with a single-word subject line. The mum. It wasn't a text or a voicemail. It was the longest message Ethan had ever written to me, and it began with 6 simple words. I was wrong. There were no excuses and no mention of the $40,000. Instead, he wrote about our camping trips, admitting he'd spent years remembering expensive vacations while forgetting the weekends that had truly shaped him. He remembered learning to build campfires, finding Orion because I'd shown him where to look, and laughing through my terrible campfire jokes before ending with one request. If you're willing. Could we meet for coffee? Just the 2 of us. No Emily, no Dad, no Vanessa. I read the email several times before replying with a single sentence. Coffee, Saturday, 10 o'clock. Saturday morning, I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, just as I used to arrive early for every one of Ethan's baseball games. Some habits never disappear. At exactly 10, Ethan walked in. He looked thinner than I remembered, and the dark circles beneath his eyes hadn't been there 6 weeks earlier. He hesitated for a moment before finally making his way to my table. Hi, Mom. Hi. After ordering coffee, he looked down at his cup. I almost didn't come. Why? I wasn't sure you'd be here. I said 10. A faint smile crossed his face. You've always kept your word. I've tried. He nodded slowly. So have I. I stayed quiet, knowing he wasn't finished. I've replayed that dinner every day, he admitted. I keep wishing I could take those words back. You can't. I know. After a brief silence, he looked up. I'm not here for money. I believe you. You do? If I thought you were, I wouldn't have come. Relief flickered across his face before he reached into his backpack and pulled out an old photograph. It showed 12-year-old Ethan and me standing beside a campfire, grinning after he'd caught his first fish. I found this while cleaning the apartment, he said. I barely remember Hawaii anymore, but I remember every minute of this trip. The campfire, the smoke, those awful hot dogs, the stars. Somehow I forgot what actually mattered. I smiled softly. I never wanted to compete with Vanessa. I know you were just trying to be my mom. And that was enough for me. It should have been enough for me too. I took a deep breath. I compared every gift, every vacation, every birthday. Somewhere along the way, I started treating generosity like a competition, and I don't even know when it happened. I think I do, I replied. When you were little, you started believing expensive meant important. Your father, Vanessa, and I all should have corrected that. He shook his head. Maybe, but I'm still responsible for what I said. After the waitress refilled our coffee, Ethan finally admitted what had changed. When you tore up the check, I thought you were being cruel. Then I asked Vanessa for help. I wasn't surprised. She said buying a house was my responsibility. She reminded me she'd already paid for the wedding, the honeymoon, and plenty of other things. That's when I realized I'd expected the person I called better to solve my biggest problem. And when she couldn't, I finally asked myself why I'd expected you to. I looked down. The answer made me sick. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as my mom and started seeing you as another resource. His honesty hurt more than any excuse could have. I let the silence sit between us before answering. You should be ashamed, but shame only matters if it changes what you do next. I'm trying. I know, but one conversation won't fix everything. He nodded. I understand. Good. I'm willing to listen, Ethan. That doesn't mean I've forgotten. The conversation finally stopped feeling like a battle. After a while, I asked, how's Emily? He smiled. Tired. She says it's all-day sickness, not morning sickness. That made both of us laugh. Then his expression softened again. Do you still want to be part of your granddaughter's life? I never stopped wanting that, I said. I only stopped believing I had to buy my place in it. His eyes filled. You never did. I know that now. Slowly, without expecting forgiveness, he reached across the table. I looked at his hand for a long moment. I placed my hand over his. I'm willing to try again. Relief washed over his face. Thank you. I smiled gently. This isn't starting over. You don't erase 29 years. You build on them, the good and the bad. He nodded. I can do that. I hope so. Over the next few months, we slowly found our way back to each other. We talked every week, sometimes about difficult conversations we'd avoided for years, and sometimes about nothing more important than how our day had gone. One evening he called because a light switch in his apartment had stopped working. I figured you'd know how to fix it. I laughed. I've only been an electrician for 35 years. 20 minutes after I talked him through the repair, he called back. It works. I never doubted it. You saved me a service call. That's what moms are for. For the first time in a long while, our conversation felt effortless. By the time Emily reached the final months of her pregnancy, I visited only when they invited me. I never pushed because trust isn't rebuilt by forcing your way back into someone's life. Instead of buying expensive baby furniture, I spent 3 weekends in my garage building a crib by hand. Every cut, every joint, and every smooth edge reminded me why I'd become a mother in the first place. Every hour I spent building it felt more valuable than anything money could have purchased. When I delivered it, Ethan stood quietly running his hand across the polished wood. You made this? I did. For her. For both of you. He smiled sadly. When I was younger, I thought love looked like expensive vacations. Now I think it looks more like this. I didn't need to answer. He finally understood. Emily stepped beside him. I owe you an apology. I encouraged the comparisons because I thought they were harmless. I was wrong. Her apology didn't erase the past, but it was sincere, and that was enough for me to accept it. Our relationship wasn't suddenly perfect. Old wounds didn't disappear overnight, and rebuilding trust often felt slower than either of us wanted. But we kept showing up for one another, one conversation, one visit, and one small act of trust at a time. People sometimes ask whether I regret tearing up that $40,000 check. I never do. I didn't destroy it to punish my son. I destroyed it because, after 21 years of quietly accepting comparisons, I finally remembered that loving my child should never require sacrificing my own self-respect. I never regretted tearing up that check. Money couldn't teach my son what that moment did. For the first time in years, he stopped comparing me to anyone else. He simply called me Mom.